Okay. How's it looking, lads?
Belizinia.
I don't speak that much Polish.
Polish.
Or whatever you just said.
Oh, here we are. Look at this. I got notifications.
We are live, and we can proceed.
Okay. Let's go for it.
All right. I can kick us off. All right. Welcome, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about the mineral deal proposed by the U.S. and Ukraine and kind of walk through the steps, the geopolitical implications, the different processes and steps the deal has gone through before reaching its final version. And we'll look at all aspects associated with the deal, some which have not been discussed in the news. So this happened at the beginning of this year, shortly after the Trump administration came into power. And it was a proposal from the Trump administration to have essentially a joint venture kind of combining aspects of the economy, in that Ukraine has vast rare earth minerals, but not necessarily the capability to mine all of them. And by lending the ability to mine that, the rare earth minerals would be divided to some extent. The initial proposal was very one-sided and was heavily criticized for being unfair to Ukraine. But at the time, Ukraine was looking at this as the only opportunity to get continued funding for their, war against Russia, like they had been receiving under the Biden administration. So the U.S. Was seeing this as an opportunity initially to exploit and, move away from China and an easy strategy to pick up some of these minerals. So, okay.
Yeah. So with the Ukraine deal here, there's a certain degree to which the winds of change were blowing about about the world ahead of the United States presidential election, and Zelensky and everybody else had the foresight to at least understand, like, okay, look, I think as Artem very aptly put it, the previous Democratic administration was predictable bad in terms of, sure, they were allocating things, sure, they were requisitioning things. There was a lot of, frankly, unnecessary restrictions on them. A lot of the hesitation and the kind of red taping that the Biden administration did led to red taping and hesitation on the part of other European partners, and that greatly minimized, in a lot of ways, the combat effectiveness of the many arms and material that were being sent to Ukraine. So, right, ATACMS, for example, once they were finally sent to Ukraine, they were immediately, I think, cordoned off to a range of 40 kilometers, in that, between all the huffing about, Russia had the time to move all of their stuff inland, out of the range, out of the allowable range of the ATACMS. But point being, and to what Steven's already said, is that Zelensky had this idea of, moving away generally from a donor-donee relationship, with the understanding that, things as they've been up to this point are politically increasingly untenable. The MAGA movement, which is, rabidly anti-Ukraine just at its core, was gaining momentum in American politics, and there was a 50-50 chance that they would have a MAGA president. So, and since Ukraine has the ability to offer certain things like money and materials, Zelensky brings this to the table in September, proposing U.S., okay, we have stuff, why don't we exchange our stuff for your stuff? And we're having more of a partnership at this point, as opposed to a vertical relationship that had been frailed up to that point to a certain degree. In October, he officially proposes this victory plan to the Ukrainian parliament. And then at that point in time, France also takes an interest. So now we have Macron kind of in the side, expressing interest in all their, not necessarily rare earth elements, but just the general minerals, is the term that I'm going to use, that are distributed around Ukraine. In November is when we kind of get a little hairier with post-election Trump starting to throw around numbers that don't make any sense. They have no basis in reality. All of the aid that's been tracked to Ukraine by both the Americans and the Europeans has been very thoroughly documented and detailed. So any kind of reports of, Zelensky's third wife using American aid to buy villas in California is blatant Russian propaganda. And as you can see with the little table that I've included here, the Europeans have actually contributed more, both in terms of military materiel and in just straight up cash tranches. But for whatever reason, Trump's geopolitical strategy of handling this conflict and war has been, beat down the Ukrainians with the stick and offer carrots to Moscow. And that really starts to materialize here when he calls Zelensky a dictator. And then we kind of don't really have too much happening around Christmas as everybody's getting consolidated during the lame duck period. But as soon as the Trump administration hits the ground running in February, we see increasingly demanding rhetoric coming from the current presidential administration where, basic things that, to my understanding, are unheard of geopolitically, which is things like, oh, this previous military aid that you've been supplied is now a debt that has to be repaid, right? So this stuff that we gave you for free, 80% of which has been enriching our own economy and our own military infrastructure, you owe us money for that. The numbers are inconsistent. So it was initially 500 billion, which is egregiously high. Then it went down to 350 billion, which is still egregiously high. The U.S. has given nowhere near $350 billion to Ukraine. I think the number is probably around 120 and change, but that's also before the Pentagon started taking stuff away from Ukraine that was already requisitioned for Ukraine, but we'll get into that later. And then obviously in February we had the Oval Office debacle, which Zelensky comes in. Zelensky, I think, was very respectable. Zelensky, again, speaking in English, so they didn't even have to have interpreters around. Gets pounced on by Trump and Vance, and that was, I don't know, we can get anecdotal here, but that was horrifying to watch in every single way. Over 50% of Americans polled afterwards considered the Trump-Vance response to be disrespectful, whereas fewer than a third considered Zelensky to be disrespectful during that exchange. That obviously had giant blowback throughout, all of our allies and potential allies throughout the Western world and beyond, because they now see how the tone of the Trump administration is going to be with people who, I don't even necessarily think it is. People that are coming to the table with money and saying, hey, let's have a deal here. Let's be productive partners in this regard. So I don't know if you guys have anything to add, any color for any of that. No? Okay. But, so specifically between the Ukraine deal, and we'll get into the drafts, I think, in a moment, because Steven also has some notes on that. In March 2025, and this was after one or two iterations already, Zelensky and Trump kind of backed off. They cooled off a little bit. They exchanged what was referred to by, I want to say, the Associated Press as conciliatory messages here. So I think to a degree this was pre-planned. I do honestly believe this was an ambush that was intended to humiliate Zelensky on the world stage. It was intended to anger him. It was intended to make him lose his cool in order to put the anti-Ukraine rhetoric in a more favorable position by justifying it by saying, they have this coked up leader that's ungrateful and. That did not work. So Zelensky came back, and then when he came back with the offer for a ceasefire, an immediate ceasefire, complying with everything that Trump was ostensibly spouting, saying, hey, we'll stop firing now as long as they do the same. Putin responded by initiating a draft of 160,000 soldiers and continuing bombing campaigns all over Ukraine. So that went on throughout March, and around late March, early April, the US and Ukraine had some progress with reaching a more equal deal. So, and we'll see this, I think, in the next slide, where the drafts were just terrible early on, and for all of the screaming and shouting that the, POTUS and the White House did, and all of their shills about how Ukraine's being ungrateful, it's very plain to see that only an idiot would ever accept the terms that were proposed in the initial frameworks and drafts. So the U.S. comes out of left field basically at the end of March with a proposal that completely switches everything up. It includes incredibly unfair and unfavorable terms for Ukraine. So Zelensky claps back by saying, look, I will give you $50 billion right now for Patriot systems. So $15 billion for Patriots and then $35 billion for other materiel. Hard cash in hand. Let's do it. And that is a masterstroke diplomatically on the part of Zelensky. I think we can maybe dig into that a little bit later. But, him just taking all of the accumulated rhetoric of the Ukrainians are ungrateful, the Ukrainians are stealing money out of the pockets of the American taxpayer, even though the worst calculations I've seen are somewhere between $350 and $380 per American is the approximate cost for destroying the Russian army. $1 million at this point KIA, which is, this is a pardon my YouTube expression, but this is a wet dream for the McCarthy era people. Like they would have just they would have committed rituals like murder suicide to do anything of this approximate scale to the Soviets 60 years ago, but we've somehow lost the notion politically that Russia's our enemy. For whatever reason, I have no idea why. Unless it's just, well, I have ideas, but so we can continue to the next slide here. And so the point is, Zelensky comes back and says, okay, if you don't want to give us this, then let us buy it, right? We have Abrams tanks that are sitting in boneyards, old F-16s, which we don't fly anymore, that are also sitting in boneyards. The F-16 that shot down a Russian Su-35 the other day was a Dutch model, I think that was initially built in the 1980s. So Zelensky's not asking for the best and brightest of the American military. He's asking to give us money to buy our old junkyard, like a big garage sale, basically. So draft timeline looks basically like what this table is. And again, I would love to hear Stephen and Artem jump on this a bit as well. Because you have, in the initial framework, you have the establishment of this, what they're calling a reconstruction fund. And Steve, this is why I'm asking you for help, Stephen, because I don't have... You have better slides about this later. So the reconstruction fund is the intra-government body that makes decisions regarding the extraction and sale of the minerals.
Right. That was my understanding because, again, I want to go back to kind of capacity and why Ukraine was initially interested in this, because there was a survey or however they sort of determine where the minerals are, the technology required to mine them, and then the approximate value was something that was kind of dispersed all over Ukraine, had been sitting there for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
And so it was determined it was probably the best way after that, initial $50 billion proposal from Ukraine to, I don't want to say repay, but make, a more attractive offer to the U.S. for continued hardware. Is that fair to say?
Yes. So with the base understanding that the political notion of us just giving aid to the Ukrainians to destroy one of our greatest geopolitical enemies is no longer, there's no appetite for that anymore for whatever reason. Even though, again, it's just you're taking work, you're destroying American jobs at this point by shutting down these avenues of supplying Ukraine aid. But since that's not politically popular among the MAGA elite, that's not something we're going to hear about, right? Like, there's, I'm not aware of the fact that we still even have any need to mass produce things like M777 artillery rounds. So, what's going to happen to the factory in Scranton, Pennsylvania? Who's going to be ordering HIMARS, especially after the well has been poisoned and Europe... Okay, we can get into this later, but yes. Anyway, mid-February is when they kind of, again, Ukraine kind of is pushing back here because they have to, right? The first iteration of the deal where the U.S. just owns everything and Ukraine makes no decisions on anything is insane. That's just not even neo-colonialism, it's just straight colonialism. And the U.S. was not able to ever provide concrete guarantees, right? There was never any discussion on paper of, we will give you X amount of HIMARS, Y amount of combat fighters, Z amount of Patriot installations and missiles, and then we'll give you parts and maintenance for same. Like, this was never on the table. It was always just Ukraine is going to give us stuff. Full stop.
Right. Yeah.
Mid-February, that improves. So the U.S. is majority managed. It's 3 out of 5 are U.S. seats instead of all 5 out of 5 being U.S. seats, like in the first draft. And then, a court in the state of New York can arbitrarily change the agreement whenever. Ukraine said no to that, obviously. By the time we get to end of February, that's when we finally hit a 50-50 agreement for the first time, where, the U.S. pulls off some of these insane conditions, which is, Ukraine owes us 120 or however many billions of dollars for the javelins and stuff that we had given them. So that's finally off the table, because that's also, again, you're entering into agreement. You're accepting to take on, $120 billion debt as a sovereign state at war with no guarantee of anything in return. So why would you ever do this? And then March is, again, the disastrous one where the U.S. is completely blindsides with all of these sticks for Ukraine, where it's all dead again. You're not allowed to join NATO. You may join the European Union if you want to, which that's already insane. Like, why does the U.S. have any say in whether or not Ukraine can be accessed to the European Union? We're back to owning everything. The U.S. is back to owning everything. Ukraine has to pay for a bunch of shit. So Ukraine has to pay to do all the extraction. For example, the United States gets access to first sale for all of these materials. For example, the Western countries in the U.S. are going to lift sanctions from Russia because Russia's now somehow involved in this bilateral deal for whatever fucking reason. Pardon my French. And it's just it's disgusting. I have no idea how this got published. I don't know if JD Vance and Trump sat down and ChatGPT'd out what's the biggest way that we can stick this into the eyes of the Ukrainians right now, and this is what it spat out. But anyway, April is when the final version comes through and it gets signed, because the Ukrainians pushed back again, and that's when Zelensky started introducing the whole we'll just buy shit from you. And then because Zelensky kind of hit him with that checkmate of, okay, you don't want to have a deal, then can we just buy stuff from you? Trump had no answer to that. So what Trump wound up doing was quietly shaking the hands behind the scene. And I think that they've allocated something like $15 million of the $50 billion that Ukraine wanted to spend in American defense. So again, I'm going to reiterate this. Ukrainians came to the table with $50 billion and said, can we buy a bunch of your old crap so that we can use it? And the Trump administration said no. So that has not been organized at all. I've heard no updates on this. And there's no reason for that, right? Unless you're just actively stalling, which is now we're just back to Biden 2.0. So at best, it's a Biden situation with that specific deal.
I think it's even better, to be frank, than Biden's situation.
In what way?
In a way that for now, regardless that we have no ceasefire and everything on both sides, so the agreement wasn't the agreement wasn't even started or something. So negotiation about ceasefire haven't been started. So the agreement about rare minerals in between Trump, Zelensky, or probably between Ukrainian and the US government, it's a bit different for Ukraine because it's the first time in our history when we have an agreement about something big and important with a foreign government. So somehow it's not some big business for local oligarchs. So for Ukraine, it's a bit of change, noticeable one. So it's not like we have old Soviet plants and factories and they will be bought by local business groups. No, that's not how it works this time. And the good part that it's the agreement is between institutions, not between persons, not between particular people. So regardless how it goes right now, we don't know how it will turn out in the future.
I guess
So that's a big change.
I guess a question that I have for you too over the course of this is how, I guess the timelines for this stuff. What's going to materialize on which timeline? Because that's the primary skepticism that I understand that people have about this is the ability of it to return any short-term significant profits for people.
I've heard a while. Oh, go ahead, Artem.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was gonna just make the point that like years to set up the sort of infrastructure for mining and harvesting and refining. I have seen trillions and the tens of trillions of dollars of value, but it's not an overnight thing, is my understanding. I'd heard that. I don't know what you all think.
So if we're talking about the timeline here, I believe that we don't know all the details of the agreement because there is a secret part which was agreed upon according to Ukrainian side and signed up according to American side. So no one saw it. What this is about in terms of the deadlines, etc. And it seems to me that all the profits we can't consider even midterm will be where they realistic, because long term it will happen because so far we have the fund GP fund in between two governments that operates the entire sales mining, etc.
Yes.
And we have nothing else. So everything so far is just on paper, and it will take time. And also considering that it's in between governments, Ukrainian parliament always I expect Ukrainian parliament always need to vote to agree to to anything that will happen with Ukraine minerals.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Very important.
So it's not a business deal. So it's gonna be long and probably unpredictable considering the war for now.
There's an important distinction to be made because Ukraine is a parliamentary republic, if I'm not mistaken. In that practically means that Zelensky can't unilaterally. So if the U.S. government is a triangle of ostensibly equal power, right? Not so much right now, but that's how it was designed. The Ukrainian president can't really do anything without parliament. So parliament is still the primary decision-making body inside of the Ukrainian government for things that are not strictly associated with the role of commander-in-chief.
Yes, it seems to me even a bit different chain that the general partner fund will agree to something with the Ukrainian government, with the prime minister, not the president.
Sure.
Because it's not the president's responsibilities. And after that, whatever agreement they will come up with, that agreement should be supported by the parliament. So everything should be it will be some bill voted.
Okay.
In terms of getting some outcome. Without that, nothing will happen.
I have a theory about what it's going to look like on a 1 to 10 year basis, but I don't want to interrupt y'all's slides. I need to build a case for my point first. So, what is this that we're looking at with the? Oh, is that just the mineral map? Is what that was? Yeah. National defense. Yeah. Too many of these things are not too many of them, but quite a. It's just extremely white. It's not coming through well on stream. Yeah.
Oh.
You can see the bodies of water in Ukraine. Oh, whatever you just did.
I didn't do
Okay.
anything.
Well, the stream figured out that. Okay, well, it's just going back and forth, basically, with the colors. Something up with the colors for whatever reason. Whoever Cork is Happy No King's Day. Hell yeah, Happy No King's Day. This is a great, I don't know, we're trying to inspire the energy here that everybody can have to go out and have a quiet, peaceful Saturday of exercising civil rights. That's what we're hoping for. And if you're going to cross your fingers for anything else, cross your fingers for a hurricane in DC. But, yeah. Yes. So, much love. What is this next one?
Sounds like a bad day for insurance companies with hurricane in DC.
Or a really good day. So.
Yeah. Just wipe everything out. Not good for us.
Yeah, maybe some positive news for the stock market. I don't know. So on Ukrainian side, this deal seems like 3 agreements, not one. So whatever we call like rare mineral agreements, there are 3 of them. So first of all is memorandum of intent in between 2 governments. And again, that was signed not in between Zelensky and Trump. That was signed in between the government of the United States and the Ukrainian government. And Zelensky is not that like a part of that government. Then fund agreement, and we talking about the general partner fund that was mentioned previously. So this is like the only official big thing that we have right now, and like it's first time in Ukrainian history when we have something that big signed up with the foreign government. So something that we have in Ukraine won't belong like without any transparency and full understanding to like Ukrainian business groups that don't report to anyone, that do like anything what they want. And also we have some secret agreement that we are not that we know about its existence, but we don't know its contents, because like there are different like rumors for now, because American side says like it's signed up and Ukrainian side says like, it's not signed up, it's just agreed upon. So I believe this is the like secret sauce to the deal that we'll know about way later.
Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna again. I have my case that I'm building over the course of the slides here. And when we get to the final geopolitical stuff, I'm gonna dramatically slam the gavel down and drop a conspiracy bomb on this stream. Not an actual bomb. YouTube /FBI /whoever it is. Yeah. All right. So this was mine. This was because a lot of this stuff, and part of the reason that a lot of I think where diplomats fail to take the ridiculous dance of international diplomacy and kind of materialize it in meaningful quantities for people that just live their lives every day is because, unless you have all the context and unless you have all the history reading and unless you have all the general understanding that comes along with living a life that's just in that specific theater of the world, you don't really get a sense of the benefits of like, oh, the U.S. has a Ukraine deal, like a benefit with you, or signed or not signed a significant minerals deal with the Ukrainian government. And most people are going to say, okay, so what, right? But in terms of just the things that are laying around in Ukraine, number one, we have to think about this is very accessible because Ukraine is, despite our behavior, going to remain a good, steadfast partner of the United States, because I think the Ukrainians also understand, just like a lot of people right now in Washington, that they just kind of have to get through this next administration. So what, in terms of literal gains, things that are tangible, you can hold inside of your hand. I just asked around, I found some numbers here. So this is a ChatGPT chart, just to be completely transparent. We do have sources for all of these things. So in these sources I checked in, they're coming from actual reputable news sites like, Reuters and Associated Press and Bloomberg and people that write, right? Not like a weird Al Jazeera editorial or something like that. And there is just a significant amount of stuff laying around that the U.S. has on the table at this point. We're going to ignore the costs and the logistics of extraction. This is just things that we have the ability to sign ourselves into gaining for nothing at this point, right? We've already paid the money of giving Ukraine a good partner aid to destroy the Russian army over the course of the last 3 years and change. And yet, here we are. So just when you think of the benefits to the United States, that's why I specifically wanted that last column there. 100 years of all graphite demand is bonkers to think about. The notion of having a bilateral agreement that's so good that you do not have to trade with any third parties at any point in time because the need is completely met, not only for this generation, but for the next several. That, in one document, I think is extremely significant from a purely diplomatic perspective. And this is going to tie into my tin hat theory at the end of this as well. Same thing with all the titanium. Who spends more money in America than the defense industry and the DoD? I don't know, honestly. Trump wants to bump them up to $1 trillion budget. We have U.S. planes flying over Tel Aviv, so our U.S. military is going nowhere. That's not the Middle East anytime soon, and that production is going to stay where it's at, even though Hegseth is trying to actively dismantle the Ukrainian side of it, probably under Trump's orders. 1,000 reactor years of uranium. What that does is it frees us from trading uranium with Russia, who, under the Biden administration, we finally stopped buying Russian uranium. I imagine that will be renewed under Trump. But again, it's good not to buy things from terrorist countries. The steel industry supply for centuries is also kind of bonkers when you think about it. Given the fact that Trump just approved the U.S. Nippon Steel deal, so that one's close to home for me, Pittsburgh. And again, just if you have a certain industries have a certain list of things that they need to have at a reasonable price, and the fact that we can cover so much with just Ukraine is, again, it seems very straightforward. And the reason that it's not straightforward up to this point, and I don't think will be straightforward for another 3 years and change, is I'll get to that later. But I just wanted to put actual numbers on here so that people can see, here's the benefit that America stands to gain by carrying this deal out, because the benefits are insane. It's completely covers many of our fundamental mineral needs for certain industries that Americans happen to care about a lot. So, leave it at that.
All right, so I wanted to talk briefly about or one of the many executive orders that Trump had signed. So initially we talked about kind of an earlier proposal of the deal, and one thing Trump has been doing a lot of is allocating and trying to, fast track things that he sees in, I don't even know if I'd say the U.S. interest, but maybe in his interest, so he can claim that happens. So, I think the Ukrainian deal got them interested in, well, what else can we get in terms of minerals and rare earth material, and controversially has looked at a lot of deposits in the U.S. and kind of removed environmental protections and things like that, and removed some of the red tape to quickly, be able to extract minerals here at home. So I think the point of the Ukraine deal from his perspective is just something he can claim. I don't think, like we discussed in the previous slide, that the message being conveyed from the administration is an increase in EV batteries and, less reliance on foreign materials. In fact, in that big, beautiful bill, they call it, a lot of incentives for things like EVs were removed. So I think there's a disconnect between what the actual tangible benefits are and the rhetoric coming out from the U.S. So I might even call that a missed opportunity. But as far as I'm aware, there hasn't been much, talking about how the Ukraine deal actually impacts people. I don't think his base would be any, less anti-Ukraine if they understood, what the benefits were. I don't think most of them care about EVs and things like that, but, who knows? Who knows? It could be a missed opportunity. So, I wanted to look at other kind of benefits of the deal, of the partnership. So we have immense manufacturing capability in the U.S. So we don't have, the same rare earth, titanium deposits, etc., that Ukraine has, which is why the deal would really be beneficial for our manufacturing industry. So, again, I think it would trickle down and help a lot of, people. Again, increased availability of things that need lithium-ion batteries. I mean, the chips going into like every fab, every microchip is going to benefit from this nuclear energy. So that's something that the average consumer might hear. They might not care about it too much, but in a couple of years, if we had the manufacturing capability up and running, refining the ore, refining these materials, I think we'd see real world GDP benefits for sure. So that's just not that discussed that much right now, I feel like. Um, so Ben had mentioned the council. So, this is new to the Trump administration, and there's supposed to be an oversight committee, as I understand it. So, we are going to be publishing numbers that, are extracted. This should be shared with the American public. I don't know how much of that is true, but I don't know if they're there in, kind of a figurehead role. I don't know. What do you guys think in terms of the role of the council with providing transparency and continued information? Like, is that going to happen? I don't know.
It's gavel time for me, so I'll let Artem drop in on that if he wants to.
Well, I don't think it's going to happen in the nearest future. Like at some point, probably like in a few iterations. Like everything happens with the administration. Like at the moment, like it will start working out.
So my 2 cents on this, and this is my gut. Trump has been boxed into a corner by Ukraine and Zelensky's successful navigation of all the, pardon my French, bullshit that his administration dumped onto Ukraine since basically November. Because he's been boxed into a corner where there's no reasonable response, or there's no reasonable rejection of $50 billion on the table, right, that Zelensky offered. There's no reasonable rejection of guaranteeing the United States supply of manganese and graphite and all these other things that we need for titanium and defense and steel and electronics and, like Steven's saying, EVs and all this stuff. There's no reasonable no to that because it's all political. There has to be a political element here that is dissuading the current administration from engaging in this in more than the minimally necessary symbolic approach for them to say, oh yeah, we'll accept the $50 billion from Zelensky. We've only appropriated $15 million. So we're going to hold on that. So we have the check mark and we're going to stall. This Ukraine deal, this gives U.S. companies and lobbyists and the government the same access to and the opportunity to invest in Ukraine's victory, because there are certain minerals that are locked behind the occupied territories right now, which is partially the whole reason that Putin invaded in the first place, to get that resource-rich region of Ukraine, which is the southeast. So the most correct way to think about it would be, I am a United States sitting president. I am going to give Ukraine, through a lend-lease, through partially just ramping up the United States military infrastructure to keep the money inside and recycle out old stuff that we don't need that's boneyarding away. Maybe some humanitarian aid if we can get the appetite for it. But we will invest in Ukraine's victory. We'll restore the 1991 borders. And at that point, all of our oil and the extraction companies are coming in, and we're going to get some money. The money is buried under the ground. Let's go get the money. We don't have to put a single American boot anywhere inside of that country in order for us to get a shit ton of cash. So let's do that. That's the reasonable approach, and that will not be taken. The reason that will not be taken is, and there's a million theories for that we can discuss to death on the podcast, but the first immediate blocker is Pete Hegseth, who has a burner Russian cell phone, and he has the numbers of Russian spies in his phone and all these other sorts of things. But as soon as this administration passes, I think now we have to bet on American corporate and military greed, which has been a strong motivator for us to do anything, more than anything else, do anything ever. Afghanistan has, $1 trillion worth of mineral agreement. Sure. We're not going to move on it for 3.5 years, and we're going to quietly, dismantle other parts of our military support for Ukraine, which has already been done. And we're going to, fall over ourselves backwards to help Netanyahu and send more American boys and girls out into the Middle East to fight Iran. But Ukraine, no way. Even though there's now just more money and minerals on the table than there's ever been before. Because of, like Artem said, the Ukrainians got together, they created a government bilateral agreement with another government to keep the money regulated, to keep the resources regulated above board with oversight from a 50-50 joint committee fund. Like, it's a great idea. I have no idea why you wouldn't want to act on it. I really, really don't. Unless they're all just Russian agents, which, But
the deal is still in between institutions. If someone is a Russian agent, let's assume there is one, so they will go away in a period of 3 years.
Correct.
And probably the fastest way to secure the outcome of the rare mineral deal with Ukraine would be a NATO membership. And you don't need to unload anything for that. It's just the paperwork. And you don't need to go and fight Russians on Ukrainian territory right after you signed up the membership agreement. So whatever you need just to publicly admit that Section 5 of Paragraph 5
Article
works out out for the all Ukrainian territory that is controlled by the central government. That's all it takes.
We're never going to.
That's all it takes. Just to cease fire.
Yeah.
And to stop and have some time to think and plan how it's going to be ended, and simultaneously you can take action on that mineral deal whatever you want.
Exactly.
You want nickel or lithium or whatever you think will help you to pump up your stock market.
Yeah. Well, and to Steven's earlier point too, why would you not? Why do you want to snuggle up to China when there's much better options on the table? There's, for all of the tacoing that's been going on, where we're gonna have 5,000, 300% tariffs and all that other bullshit, only to have it swapped around at the last second after people have made a crap ton of money by either shorting the stocks or by learning that the tariffs are going to be pulled at a certain time that everybody just goes all in. And obviously they make a shit ton of money on that. Why even bother with that? Just go, get away from China. But that's just, again, it's never going to happen. Our director of national intelligence is posting videos on Twitter of San Francisco getting nuked because Ukraine's going to pull us into World War III if we do all this garbage. But I have a video in the pipe coming down for that. And, the Russians have at this point used nuclear threats probably about 100 times since the start of the full-scale invasion. So, again, it is all, as much as I hate it, it's all political. It's all political, and it's all the stuff and the posturing that the current administration has to do for, on behalf of this structure that's been created to, I don't know, I just don't get it. They can't even hold together their own house. They can't get anything passed. We have so much internal dysfunction right now because of the headwinds of people that aren't out of their fucking minds, and then everybody else that wants to get reelected, or rather people that aren't out of their minds and care about getting reelected in 2026 and 2028, and then the cult that they're knocking heads, and that's what it's going to be for 4 years at this point. Elon Musk, the richest man in the world, can't even stand the heat in that kitchen. So we're not getting anything productive done for the next 3 years, whether we like it or not. No. We gotta wait this out. Unfortunately.
True. This slide just mentions other benefits. Again, decreased reliance on foreign energy has been mentioned. China, more jobs, right? We need to expand our manufacturing capability if we suddenly have tons of more, materials that need to be refined and processed and put into products. So all upsides. So we've talked about this a bit, just kind of the model, the outline of the deal. This version, I think, is the reiterated one after the initial February deal. Am I right about that? That was a little more favorable to Ukraine. So, again, we had discussed that quite a bit, but it's as was mentioned, more of a 50-50 agreement. Again, we talked about that quite a bit too. Ukraine suddenly connected to new markets because before they haven't been mining and refining all of these trillions of dollars of material that they have. But the demand for all of these is India and Japan and other countries look to expand, for example, their space programs. Titanium is the number one material used in building that because of its strength. So lithium, right? If we're in theory moving to more EVs, that's huge for batteries and every other cell phones, everything. So only upsides for both. So this was kind of in something that happened. I want to briefly mention that happened in the last kind of week that she is watching this in China and seeing that the deal actually is coming to fruition and that how would they feel about that? So if they're a big exporter of materials to the U.S., they might be looking at this and possibly being a little apprehensive. But at the same time, maybe does Ukraine have a lot of material that they can use too? So this is kind of a wait and see what happens, but China's very much paying attention. Just wanted to mention that real quick. So we've discussed this a little bit, but what actually is in the material, lasers, batteries, guidance systems, huge, as we said, military and aerospace applications to consumer products. So it's hard to imagine like certain, electronics that aren't benefited in some way from the sudden kind of, maybe not sudden, but new deposits and new raw materials. It's going to be huge. So processing is more challenging. Yeah, that's true. But again, if we have to expand that, it's probably going to create a lot more high-paying jobs.
If I can just jump in really quick, there's no reason why. I mean, we shouldn't get back into bed with China on this kind of thing. Moral arguments aside, we are just so many trillions of dollars in debt that if a country like China wants to just call that in and destroy the global economy at any time, they can just call in that check. And that would be the depression probably that's been unprecedented in the history of our entire species. Because if we have, what's the current deficit at? 36 trillion?
Yeah, I think that's something like that.
$36 trillion, right? And foreign debt is a significant chunk of that.
Right.
So, the United States and the dollar come crashing down, and that would just be a disaster. Whereas, why, if you're worried about labor costs, which is the concern, right? Which is why 70% of farm staff are undocumented immigrants to keep costs down. Why would you not try to take American talent and inject that into Ukraine, where things are generally much cheaper? Not necessarily Chinese sweatshop Apple suicide net cheaper, but it's certainly a damn sight cheaper and more friendly in terms of just a horizontal relationship than we've ever had with China, or the mainland China, not Taiwan. But so I just don't. This is a thing that seems so obvious, and that if anybody were interested in the correct outcomes that are actually optimal for Americans, the American economy, and even the rich people win in this. That's the thing I don't get. It's not even just the billionaires winning this time. It's everybody up and down the scale wins. The Ukrainians get American talent exchange going on with mineral extraction. The Americans go on. The Ukrainians get to secure their border. Ukrainians get jobs, the Americans get jobs, the Americans get cheaper minerals for better, and they don't have to worry about the stoking the fires of a hostile relationship with China that Trump has done nothing but pretend to spar with since 2016.
Right.
in China anyway is a massive enemy of ours. They do nothing but steal our shit and conduct espionage out the wazoo. So we should be moving themselves. We should be isolating China globally, pulling in India, pulling in all these other people that want to have partnerships with us, and we're doing the opposite for whatever reason.
Yes, it's a very good point. Europe too,
because this outcome takes years, and this is not like there is no administration like that has enough of time to achieve everything or anything before the next election.
Trump has the Supreme Court, the White House, the Senate, and the House. I have
How
never.
long does he have the Senate yet?
It doesn't. He doesn't matter. If he was trying to do anything for the right reason that wasn't just hype culty bullshit, he could pass it immediately. If he wasn't trying to pass stuff that was highly controversial or dangerous, stuff that the senators and the representatives are looking at this saying, if I pass this, I'm not going to get voted in again. Right, stuff that was actually good for people, he could get this done immediately. That's why this is a pity. This is absolutely within the power of my government and Steven's government to do. We could do all this shit right now. We could make all this. We could send all the military to Ukraine. We could get all this shit done. We could get ahead of Europe. We could get ahead of China.
Ukraine doesn't need all, just old one.
I know, but that's even more to my point. That this is so accessible. There's such a great short list of opportunities that are not being used because whatever. Красно решил не.
So, if this were to be put in place, there were some environmental concerns. Yeah. Again, we talked about opening up lands. This is just, something that potentially could happen. Years down the road, environmental groups might not be too happy about increased manufacturing, impact on water, national parks, things like that. So this administration has not done a whole lot in terms of protecting national park land. But again, we might be years down the road, so who knows? But potential concerns with the deal.
But if you were a mining company, why would you not draw up a proposal for this now?
Yeah.
Why, if you're an Exxon or a Shell, why are you not doing this immediately? A U.S. Nippon, U.S. Steel.
Yeah, that's a good point. They should be. They should be on the federal, government website, bidding, like they do with all their contractors.
Yes.
Get the ball rolling. And here we see some of the benefits, right? Again, less foreign dependency, new jobs, expanded billions of dollars. So, we're happy that our, cars and cell phones have batteries and, maybe you don't have to wait so long. I don't know, but it's a massive benefit to both countries as we've kind of been discussing. So, we looked at really Ukraine's role in the global economy, and this single deal really is a game changer for both countries. Again, we don't have all of these rare earth minerals and things in the U.S., but if we put it to use, if we get our factories set up, and then Ukraine's immensely benefited, from the new income, entering new markets that they weren't before. Huge GDP upside. So, all right.
Yeah. So what I wanted to do is to just briefly summarize. Right. So Stephen, thank you, because you gave me and Artem the ability to really contextualize a lot of the, I think, international diplomatic significance of where this could go and how it could economically manifest, and all of these extremely useful ways for all parties in a world where we don't live in an idiocracy. But there is another point here, which is not only the deal itself and how it can manifest positively into all of these good outcomes, which I still, Artem, to your point about the secret sauce, I'm still hoping secretly that, Boeing and Lockheed have their eyes on this titanium and everything else like that, so that they're just waiting. So then it goes, greed turns to lobbyists, lobbyists turns to bills, bills turn to things that actually, could potentially help Ukraine here again. And it is, I will point out, it is heartening to see that there is some still strange degree of bipartisan support for giving the carrots back to Ukraine and giving the sticks back to the Kremlin, where they duly belong. But we have to look at the ramifications of how the current government and the administration proceeded through this deal, because we did not proceed through these stages in a vacuum. It was very public. It was very messy. It was, I don't think, in any way well handled by our side specifically, the American side of things. I was following this day by day, reading the English language publications, reading the Ukrainian language publications. I saw as much of the Oval Office cavalcade as I could watch. And the reality is that the way that the U.S. took this situation, attempted to exploit Ukraine after incorrectly underestimating the strength of Ukraine's position, has very publicly blown up in Trump's face. And it's going to have terrible ramifications for our ability to have constructive relationships with people who are and should continue to be our allies if they continue to tolerate what's going on. So, if anything, when you look at the Oval Office, you look at these conditions that are coming in from the side out of left field after everything was extensively agreed upon. All this does is this makes our allies look at us and say, we need to step away. We need to let whatever is happening happen. We need to not be involved. This is a nightmare for us. We are heavily reliant on a free exchange of foreign talent and ideas and workforce for a variety of reasons, as well as tourism. Our academic institutions are full of foreigners who build amazing things in this company, like CRISPR and things that the cures to heart disease and all these other things. This is not just Americans in the American bubble in America doing this stuff, right? These are academics that come in from all over the world that have fellowships at places. These are people that contribute their talent in STEM industries. This is, what percentage of Silicon Valley do we think was born in America, U.S. citizen? I would wager it's much smaller than you think. Mm-hmm. So this signaling that our administration has done that, we're America first and we don't care how little sense that makes practically is disastrous for us and our ability to have productive partnerships. To the point where Kaya Kallas, who is, oh man, she makes me weak in the knees. Love this woman. She's amazing. Kaya Kallas, for anybody that does not know, is one of the few people in the world that has a position of high political standing and B, understands Putin, which is why she don't take no shit from nobody. And as soon as she saw that whole Oval Office thing, she just can freely say things like the free world needs a new leader. I think she's absolutely right. Can you imagine how deeply embarrassing it must be for our intelligence networks, our men and women of the FBI and the NSA and the DI and all the other places that go abroad and they do nasty shit and they die miserable deaths trying to keep U.S. intelligence afloat, for that one thing to happen, and then to have Britain, one of our historically closest allies, to say, we need to remove the U.S. from Five Eyes and create a Four Eyes. Likely because the U.S. is compromised to this extent. It's not just that we were having bad behavior. The implication here is that our intelligence networks are completely leaking or just intentionally given off to Russia, which we've seen that in probably China as well. But we've seen that in the, what was it? I forget which office Doge went to, but functionally it might have been the Social Security office where Doge went in, they modified all the root level access to things, installed a backdoor, and then all of the information in that archive was exfiltrated to a Russian IP address within like 6 hours of Doge being in that building. That is not a coincidence. Euro isolationism is not a bad thing inherently, but it's, like Steven in Artembo said, it's a bunch of lost opportunity for us. Europe was going to buy a bunch of F-35s. Europe buys things like HIMARS. Europe invested a lot of money in the military tech that we spend $1 trillion a year to produce. And, while Europe absolutely needs to get off its ass and do more defense investment, they've now done that, maybe partially in response to this garbage. But what we needed them to do is we needed them to invest more money and invested in NATO with us, because then everyone's benefiting. We're exchanging military intelligence, we're exchanging parts, we're exchanging maybe even joint deployments, right, where we're conducting joint NATO exercises, things of this nature to keep everybody happy, one working unit. However, the Europeans have said, okay, we're going to invest a shit ton more money, 800 billion euros over the next till 2030 or something like that. It's within the next 10 years. And the US can go kick rocks. So, like, worst possible outcome, where a bunch of money is being generated and we don't have access to that revenue stream strictly because of the bad behavior going on here and the other implications, which is point number 3. Rheinmetallstadt, ASML. ASML is the one company that produces these super, 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 super fine microconductors that power a huge swath of devices. These are stocks that are $700, $1,300. They've gained anywhere between 30 to 50% of that value since Trump took office in January. Because they looked at what was going on. The European government said, okay, we're going to invest in our own shit and keep that money out of the States. In the meantime, Lockheed and Boeing and everybody else has suffered significantly. And then there's the indirect point of now we have Iran, we have North Korea.
Yet.
They're still there. What was it? Everything that's happened with Israel and Iran, I read an article today on Axios, says that it's basically single-handedly scuttled all of American diplomatic efforts since the beginning of the Obama administration to mitigate the nuclear potential of Iran. Right? Iran, there's no reason for Iran to not act out now and do what it can to destroy Israel. Right? There's no reason for Iran to not to stay in check and play nice with anybody. Iran has been emboldened. North Korea is emboldened. China understands that you can buy certain people off. The Russians obviously get more emboldened than ever. And I think in a world where Russia, North Korea, China, and Iran are winning, the U.S. and the free world lose more often. Because I
it's
think
not lose. It's even worse. It's lose for decades. Because the Western world is the world of the democratic institutions, and what people would do when Russia, Iran, and China wins, they will vote for far right and far left. So we will end up again in the 30s of the previous century, and for recovering, it will take us decades to go back where we started.
The Poles just locked themselves into 5 years of MAGA. The Slovakians did that, but their election should be coming up soon, I think 2026. Hungarians the Hungarians have an election next year. They're in the same kind of place. Serbians, the Romanians actually got their shit together because the Romanians recognized Russian election interference and they banned the candidate that the Russians were interfering for. And wouldn't you know it, they had an anti-corruption person actually win the election because they understand to handle their shit. Yeah, so Romania is the last fully good neighbor that Ukraine has.
Not the
what
last.
about Moldova?
Last few. Moldova also.
Yeah.
On our side.
Yeah.
Well, because again, the Moldovans have what? The Moldovans have Transnistria, which is that idiotic pocket.
They have literally the same situation as Ukraine had, but that situation is kind of frozen for the moment.
Yeah.
And Russia has no access to that. Otherwise, Moldova would be also like on fire.
Yes. Yes. Because Moldova is also occupied by the Russians.
Yeah.
And that's, I think Artem said it even better. It's a long-term losing game. It's not even a short game. It takes such a long time to build back the trust in civil society and civic institutions that we have already lost in the States. It's going to be a mess. But, Yeah. So that's my 2 cents on how badly we've damaged our soft power networks. Well, we're not even going to talk about USAID being shut down and the Peace Corps and AmeriCorps being shut down.
Yeah.
Because that's just... oh my god.
All right. Well.
Cool. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Anybody got any... Alright, we're still good. Alright. The stream has ended, which means I'm going to end the stream. Thank you, everybody, for stopping in. Who stopped in? We had a few people in, I see. Still have a few active watchers. So This will be up on our YouTube channel. Look out for updates from us. We got a new video coming, whatnot. So, oh, there we go. We did this thing again.